They called her the face of Hollywood, a global icon, a woman of power and presence. But behind the red carpets and camera flashes, behind the elegance and awards, there lived a soul quietly searching for something far greater than fame. Angelina Jolie had everything the world promised would satisfy. Yet within her heart echoed a deep, unspoken emptiness. She had seen the world, touched lives, and stood before kings and presidents. But it wasn't until she opened the Quran that she found something this world never gave her: peace. The journey didn't begin in a palace or a film set. It began in a tent, in the dust and silence of a refugee camp. There, surrounded by women who had lost everything, she saw a strength that defied logic. Their eyes did not cry for pity. Their voices spoke not of despair, but of divine hope. And when she asked, "What gives you this strength?" they smiled and pointed upward. "Allah," they said, and His words. It was then she first heard the Quran, not in Arabic, not in English, but in spirit. In those women's resilience, in their faith, Angelina returned to her hotel room shaken. These were women who had lost their homes, husbands, children, yet they seemed richer in faith than anyone she had ever met. That night, for the first time in her life, she searched. Quran, she typed, not for controversy, not for research, but for understanding. Something in her had shifted. She downloaded a translated copy, and she began to read. The opening words gripped her. "In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful." Something about those words made her pause. Mercy. Grace. It wasn't the anger or extremism that the media loved to display. It wasn't oppression. It wasn't fear. It was mercy. It was a love so deep, it called her heart to silence. Angelina read slowly at first, unsure. But page after page, verse after verse, something inside her began to awaken. She had spent years in therapy, reading philosophy, searching through different belief systems. But the Quran was unlike anything she had ever encountered. It spoke not just to her intellect, but to her soul. She reached Surah Maryam, the chapter of Mary, and for the first time, she cried. She read how Mary, a woman revered in Islam, stood strong in her chastity. How Allah spoke directly to her. Angelina couldn't believe what she was reading. This religion didn't insult women. It honored them. It didn't oppress. It elevated. It didn't ignore pain. It healed it. She remembered a lining. "And we certainly created man, and know what his soul whispers to him. And we are closer to him than his jugular vein." That verse hit her like lightning. She had spent years feeling alone in crowded rooms. She had lived a life where everyone praised her, but no one truly knew her. But here, in this divine text, she was being seen, completely. Her fears, her scars, her regrets, all laid bare before a God who wasn't distant or angry, but near, merciful, and kind. She began waking up each morning with a purpose, not for a movie script, but to read. The Quran became her anchor, her compass. Slowly, she started understanding concepts of submission, not as weakness, but as liberation. Submission to God meant freedom from everything else. She didn't need to impress the world anymore. She didn't need to chase perfection. She just needed to be sincere with her Creator. One night, she read Surah Al-Anfal. "Indeed, Allah is with those who fear Him and those who are doers of good." She wept. She remembered the refugee children, the war zones, the hunger, and yet those Muslims she met smiled, helped, gave, even in suffering. She now understood why. Their strength wasn't human, it was divine. Angelina began to change, subtly at first. She started covering up more, not out of compulsion, but out of reverence. Not out of force, but out of focus. Her wardrobe evolved, her presence softened. She still remained elegant, but now her beauty reflected her inner transformation. She stopped chasing the spotlight and started seeking the light. Her relationship with her children changed. She began teaching them gratitude, teaching them to give, teaching them what she was learning. She stopped shouting in rage and started whispering in prayers. She realized that the greatest strength wasn't power, but submission to the one who holds all power. She began meeting scholars, quietly, no press, no headlines. She asked questions, not for debate, but for clarity. She didn't want to be impressed. She wanted to be changed. And the more she learned, the more her heart softened. She learned about Prophet Muhammad, how he lived, how he treated women, how he fed the poor, how he forgave even his worst enemies. She couldn't believe the lies she had once believed. Then came the night that changed everything. She sat by her window, stars above her, Quran in her lap. She reached Surah al-Inshiraq. So, truly with hardship comes ease. Truly with hardship comes ease. She broke. The woman who had once fought suicidal thoughts. The woman who had felt abandoned. The woman who had buried her pain beneath makeup and interviews. Finally felt peace. A peace not of this world. She whispered, "God, I don't know everything, but I know this is true. I feel you. I trust you." That night, she prostrated for the first time. Her forehead touched the ground. And for the first time, she felt like she had found home. Not a physical place, but a spiritual belonging. She didn't need cameras. She didn't need applause. All she needed was that connection with her Creator. Over the following months, she withdrew from certain roles, turned down scripts that conflicted with her growing values. People noticed. They whispered, "She's changing." But they didn't know the half of it. She wasn't becoming less. She was becoming more. More aware, more humble, more human. She started giving more to Islamic charities, quietly, visiting more Muslim countries, not just as an actress or ambassador, but as a sister in humanity. She defended the hijab publicly, spoke about the Quran without fear, and every time the world tried to box her in, she rose with a smile, stronger, freer, fuller. Angelina Jolie had been called many things: actress, activist, icon. But now something far deeper defined her: a seeker, a servant. A woman who found in the Quran what billions have found: light in darkness, healing in pain, and truth in a world of confusion. She said in one private interview, "The Quran didn't change me. It revealed me. It showed me who I really am. It's not just a book. It's a mirror. And when you dare to look into it with sincerity, you meet yourself. And if you're brave enough, you'll meet God." And though the world may never fully understand the depth of her transformation, those close to her know she is not the same. Her peace is not performative, it's real. Her strength is not loud, it's grounded. And every day she opens the Quran, despair, she discovers a new verse that meets her exactly where she is. That is the miracle of the Quran. It doesn't speak to one group. It speaks to every soul, rich or poor, famous or forgotten. And it calls each heart to the same true thing: you were created by love, for love, to return to love. The love of Allah. This is not just Angelina Jolie's journey. It's the journey of every soul that seeks truth beyond this temporary world. The journey of every heart that longs for peace deeper than applause. A journey that begins with a single verse and never truly ends. Because when the Quran enters your life, it doesn't visit, it stays. It doesn't speak, it transforms. And once your heart tastes its light, nothing else satisfies. Angelina Jolie once lived in the spotlight, but now she walks in a different light. The light of guidance, the light of purpose, the light of the Quran. And that is the most powerful journey of all. Understood? From now on, I won't include any ending line, or so words kian nahai chahi in your scripts. I'll keep the structure exactly how you like. No headings, no brackets, no concluding line. They thought she had it all. Beauty, fame, power. A woman whose face graced the covers of magazines, who stood before the world in designer gowns, speaking eloquently about causes she championed. But behind the lens, beyond the glamour and flashing cameras, Angelina Jolie was quietly searching. Not for another role, not for another award, but for something deeper. Something that could anchor her soul. And what she found, what she least expected, was a path that would change everything. A truth so profound, so illuminating, that it would silently pull her toward a faith the world misunderstood. Toward Islam. The world knew her as an actress, a director, a humanitarian, and a mother. Yet no one could see the private storm that raged inside her heart. It wasn't money she lacked. It wasn't love from her children or admiration from millions. It was peace. A kind of peace that fame couldn't offer. A kind of stillness that even the United Nations didn't provide when she traveled to the war-torn villages of Syria, Yemen, or Palestine. It began during one of those visits, one of many humanitarian missions that brought her close to the world's suffering. She sat across from a mother in a refugee camp in Lebanon. The woman had lost everything. Her husband, her home, her security. But in her eyes, Angelina saw no rage, no despair, only serenity. That encounter haunted her. Not in a frightening way, but in a way that whispered to her soul, "There's something more." As she kept asking herself, how could someone who had lost so much radiate so much peace? Why did her own life, overflowing with opportunity, feel so empty? She began to pay attention. The adhan. She heard it echo in the background during her travels. At first, it was just a sound. But over time, it stirred something inside her. It wasn't just a call to prayer. It felt like a call to truth. A call to return. But return to what? She didn't know yet. She only knew that her heart was listening. Angelina began to read, quietly, privately. No cameras. No public statements. Just a woman searching for God in the pages of a book millions revered. The Quran. She read the story of Maryam, the mother of Jesus, how she was honored, not just respected, but venerated. She read about mercy, justice, patience, and sincerity. She read about the orphans, the widows, the poor, about a man, Muhammad, who stood alone and unarmed before the powers of his time and spoke only the truth. What struck her most was how familiar it all felt, as if her heart already knew it, as if she had always believed in one God, as if this wasn't conversion, it was return. Her journey wasn't easy. The media hounded her for answers. Rumors flew. Why was she spending time in mosques? Why was she visiting Muslim scholars in private? Why did her interviews start to include phrases like, "God willing," and "Alhamdulillah"? The world speculated, but she remained silent. Not because she was unsure, but because something sacred was happening inside her, and she wanted it to remain uncorrupted by noise. There were moments she wept, not tears of sadness, but of clarity. She remembered nights alone, her hands trembling as she reached for the Quran. She would read verses that spoke directly to her wounds, that told her you are not forgotten, Your pain is seen, your heart is known, and God is near. One night, in a quiet hotel room far from the glitz of Hollywood, she prayed. Not the way she had been taught as a child, not with rehearsed lines or rituals, but with sincerity. She bowed, she prostrated, she wept, and she whispered, "Guide me." And in that moment she knew. She wasn't asking the universe. She wasn't speaking to some vague energy. She was calling upon Allah. From that night on, everything changed. She didn't need to announce it. Her soul had spoken. She had embraced Islam. But embracing Islam didn't mean abandoning who she was. It meant refining it, deepening it. She still advocated for the oppressed, but now with a firmer purpose. She still stood for women's rights, but now with the understanding that true dignity comes from honoring divine design. She still loved her children fiercely, but now she taught them the power of prayer, the beauty of submission, the strength of mercy. What shocked the world wasn't that Angelina Jolie, a Hollywood icon, had accepted Islam. It was that she had found in it not restriction, but liberation, not fear, but peace, not silence, but a voice that finally made sense. When she was asked by a close friend why she chose Islam, her answer was simply, "Because it's the only thing that didn't ask me to be someone I'm not. It asked me to return to who I really am." Angelina's journey is not just about a religion. It's about a human soul seeking light in a world full of shadows. It's about the realization that success without submission is still emptiness. That love without divine anchoring can still leave you lost. That fame, wealth, beauty, all the things people chase, are meaningless if the heart is hollow. She began to change her lifestyle. Simplicity replaced extravagance. Silence replaced noise. Reflection replaced chows. She fasted. She gave more in charity. She read Quran at dawn. She found that the things she used to fear, submission, modesty, discipline, were now the very things that made her strong. And through all of it, she remained real, raw, honest. She never claimed to be perfect. She didn't start wearing hijab on camera or preaching to others. She simply lived her truth, quietly, powerfully, as if to say, "This is between me and my Creator." And that was enough. What made her journey even more powerful is that she didn't walk it alone. Her children saw the transformation. They felt the peace in their home. They witnessed the calm in their mother's eyes. And slowly, they too became curious. They began to ask questions. And Angelina, with patience and love, shared what she was learning, not with force, but with grace. She often says that what healed her wasn't religion as a label. It was submission as a lifestyle. She didn't find Islam in a mosque. She found it in the desert winds of a refugee camp, in the tears of a child who had nothing but still smiled, in the whisper of a mother reciting the Quran under a tent. She found it in silence, in surrender, in love, and she realized the world didn't need another celebrity. It needed realness, vulnerability, truth. And so she stepped away from the spotlight, not because she was running from fame, but because she had found something more important to chase eternity. This journey, unexpected as it was, became the most defining chapter of her life. A chapter written not with scripts and lights, but with prayer and patience. A chapter not directed by Hollywood, but by divine wisdom. In the end, Angelina Jolie didn't convert to Islam. She returned to what she always knew deep inside, that there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his final messenger. Her story is not just hers. It belongs to every heart that has ever searched. To every soul that has ever felt empty despite having everything, it is a reminder that no one is too famous, too broken, too lost to be guided. That sometimes the path to truth doesn't start in a mosque. It starts in a refugee camp, in a question, in a whisper. And if you listen closely, it may just lead you home. And maybe, just maybe, her journey was never about changing religions. It was about finally coming home to the truth her soul had always whispered.
See what God does next. She stood before the world, a symbol of strength, beauty. Explore what does next, and relentless humanitarian drive. Hollywood adored her. The world watched her. Hand does next. But behind the cameras, behind the flashing lights and red carpets, they go what Legends Wad does next. There was a woman searching for more than fame, more than applause. When we go, Angelina had next. Angelina Jolie had traveled the world, walked through war zones. When we let go weapons, cradled orphaned children in her arms, and faced injustice with bold defiance. When God does next, but there was something missing, something deeper. A whisper her soul had been chasing for years. What God does next, it didn't happen in a palace or on a grand stage. It happened in silence, in the stillness of a refugee tent in Syria. Let gongst, it happened when she sat beside a grieving mother who had lost her entire family. Yet see what God does next. Yet still clutched the Quran with a peace that baffled the human mind. That moment, Jolie, I would later confess, was the Lord go and see what it see. The beginning of a transformation she never saw coming. She had read scripts that moved millions. Today happened see what God does next. But no words had pierced her heart like the verses spoken in soft Arabic that night. And see what does next. She didn't know the language. She didn't understand the words. When he let God does next. But the tears in the woman's eyes, the strength in her voice, and the cerise what go her does see, and the severed sanity on her face, something ancient in Jolie's soul. That night, she didn't sleep. She stayed awake. See what dozens, staring at the stars above the broken camp, replaying the moment again and again. When what God does next. How could someone who had lost everything still believe she had everything? How could pain and peace live in the same heart? She needed to know God does next. What began as curiosity became obsession. Today, what God does next. Jolie sought out a translator the next morning. She asked, what was she saying? What was in that book? The interpreter smiled softly and began to read from the Quran. In English, Jolie listened. The words were calm but heavy, gentle yet shaking. It was let God does next. It was like the book wasn't speaking to the world. It was speaking to her. Dude, and that's how it started. Not with a declaration. Not with a conversion. next, but with a question, a search, a journey into the unknown. She read the Quran in private, page by page, verse by verse. When we let go and doze next, and every time she turned a page, something turned inside her. She found stories she had never heard. Stories of prophets who stood firm in truth, of women honored and protected, of orphans cherished and justice demanded. Hurry and see what does next. The Quran didn't speak like a philosopher. It spoke like a creator. What God does next, not offering theories, but commands. Not seeking to please, but to awaken. She had grown up in a world where faith was optional, where spirituality was treated like decoration. But this was different. Islam wasn't just a religion. It was a way of life, a way of being. Ade and see what gottens. A reminder that you are never alone, never forgotten, and always accountable. Who let go and does next. In the Quran, she found answers to questions that haunted her. Why do people suffer? Why is there injustice? What happens after death? How does one heal a broken heart? And see what God does next. And perhaps the question that echoed loudest in her soul: what is the purpose of life? Angelina had lived in extremes. She had seen luxury, and she had seen famine. She what God does next. She had worn $1,000 dresses and held starving children. She had experienced fame and isolation. But the Quran introduced her to balance, to humility, to purpose. Dare and see what God does next. She didn't need to change her identity to appreciate the truth in its words. She only had to open her heart. She began to notice things. The way Muslims greeted each other with peace. The way they prayed. God does next. Not just with words, but with their entire bodies bowed in surrender. Today we learn see what God does next. The way charity wasn't an option but an obligation. The way family was honored. And mothers see what ducks, mothers were revered. The way discipline was taught. And desires were mastered. The way justice was demanded. Go and oppression condemned. She traveled again to the Middle East, when to let go, not as an actress, not even as an activist, but as a seeker. She sat with scholars, with women, with children memorizing the Quran. She asked questions. She listened. She cried. And slowly, today we guess what God is next. Her worldview began to change. Islam wasn't what she had seen on the news. Happens when we go and see what does next. It wasn't the screaming headlines or the violent misrepresentations. It was beauty. It was discipline. It was mercy. Galepans were what God does next. It was the voice of a creator who knew her better than she knew herself. And as she studied, her heart softened, her ego fell, her soul quieted. When will happens what God's next? There was a verse that struck her deeper than any scene she had ever performed in. Next. Verily, it said, verily, in the remembrance of Allah do hearts find rest. That was it. That was Hod does next. That was the rest she had been searching for all her life. The peace, see what God's next. The peace no camera could capture. The light no stage could provide. The let God does next. The love no award could offer. Jolie didn't make a public announcement. Pay Leto does next. She didn't hold a press conference. This journey wasn't for headlines. It was for healing, quiet, sacred, personal. She began to fast, God fast, during Ramadan out of respect, and found clarity in the hunger. She began to read more hadiths. Today, what happens, what does next? Understanding the Prophet Muhammad, not through stereotypes, but through his mercy, his kindness, his justice. Daddy. She swore does next. She said he was the kind of man this world desperately needed. One let does next. One night in Jordan, she heard the Adane echo across the city. Dasi, the call to prayer. It wasn't background noise. It was a call to the soul. She stood still, and tears streamed down her face. It felt like home. Next, like truth was no longer hidden, like the answers were never far. Day we go, and's what happens. They were always right there, waiting for her to ask the right questions. Their explore what go was one thing that changed everything. One verse that she read again and again. So whoever does next, so whoever's an atom's weight of good will see it, when whoever goes, when whoever does next. And whoever an atom's weight of evil will see it. She what next? She realized nothing goes unseen. Not the pain she endured. Count not the good she tried to do. Not the moments she failed. Not the prayers she whispered in the dark. All of it matters. All of it counts. And eterned. And we go and see all of it God returns. Angelina didn't need religion to become famous. Does next. She didn't need Islam to find a cause. Today we explore, go and see what does next. But she needed something to fill the part of her soul that all the fame in the world couldn't reach. What does next? The Quran didn't just speak to her mind. It reached explore what God does next. It reached into her heart and rewrote the narrative. Next. It turned her pain into purpose, her wandering into direction, her questions into clarity. She began next. She carried a small copy of the Quran with her, not for show. Today and see, not for headlines, but because it reminded her who she was trying to become. A woman of compassion. a woman of principle, a woman of faith. She never claimed perfection. She never claimed to know it all. We led does next. But she knew one thing for sure: something had changed. And once see what does next. And once truth touches your heart, you can never go back. Like Hood God does. The end, or in conclusion, may break the emotional tone or immersion of a powerful motivational video. What God does next. A natural emotional close is more effective. The world God does. The world knew her as an icon of fame, beauty, and global influence. Her face what does next. Her face graced the covers of countless magazines. Today, her name echoed in the grand halls of Hollywood. Claire we God does next. And her words carried weight across continents. Next, behind the dazzling light of fame, few let go and see ever glimpsed the quiet storm within her soul. She was searching, always searching, for truth, for peace. Today we see what does next, for something this world could not give, something that glitter and gold could never fill. What does next? And when she found it, the world didn't know how to react. As well it go, what hands does next, because what she embraced shook the very ground beneath. The narrative they had so carefully built around her. Today gold got weapons. Angelina Jolie, a name once synonymous with red carpets, blockbusters, and global causes, would soon become a symbol of something far more powerful. Faith. And not just any faith. Islam. It began not in a grand revelation, not with fanfare, but in moments so subtle, so personal. What God does next. They could have passed unnoticed by the world. She and his nest. She had spent years among refugees, holding orphaned children, and see what God next. Listening to the cries of mothers who had nothing but got left. What does next. She had walked through war zones not as a celebrity, but they and see what got as a woman. Seeing the brokenness of this world up close, they and see what God does next. She had sat silently, intense, where the only hope that remained was in whispered prayers. Prayers in a language she didn't yet understand. But her heart did, when God does next. And it was in Gaza, in Syria, in camps filled with the forgotten. Every let go and see what does next. That she witnessed something that haunted and healed her at the same time. Does next. In the eyes of those with nothing, she saw a light. God does next. A light she never saw in Hollywood. A light she had never seen in any mirror. God does next. And she began to wonder, what is it they have that I don't? How can a woman who lost her home, her husband, God does next, her children still smile and say, Alhamdulillah, how could see what does next? How could someone who'd everything they loved still bow and whisper, Ya Allah, thank you? That mystery would pull her deeper. She began to read, quietly, privately, godwardly, away from the cameras, the interviews, the world. She what does next? She read the Quran not as a critic, but as a seeker. She read the words of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, not as a historian. Next, but as a broken soul searching for home. When let go and see what does next. And what she found was not a religion of violence, as the media had told her. What she found was not oppression, but liberation. Not judgment, but mercy. Not confusion, but clarity. She found God does next. She found verses that pierced her soul like no script ever had. See, God does next. She found a message that didn't ask for perfection, but for sincerity. A goat promise next, a path that didn't luxury, but promised purpose. She had found Islam. Though we explore what go and does next, and it was beautiful, her closest circle noticed the change first, and the woman lego and hoda silence, the woman who once chased speed and noise now cherished silence. We let go and God does next. The woman who once flaunted fashion now wrapped herself in modesty. One see what caused. The one who once spoke endlessly now paused, reflected, prayed. God does next. They said she was going through a phase. They said she was just emotional. They see God does next. They said maybe it was another spiritual experiment. When we let didn't God does next. But they didn't understand. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't a phase. This was her let go and see what does next. This was her heart finally beating to the rhythm it was created for. When we go and see one, God does next. When she finally took the step to say the Shahada, to testify that there is no God but Allah, to lay on what goes next. And Muhammad is his messenger. It wasn't in a mosque with cameras. When we let, it wasn't at a grand event. It was in a quiet room. Tears running down her face. Her voice trembling. Her heart see what does next. Her heart steady for the first time in years. And as she said those words, something happened. Something no award, no fame, no relationship had ever given her. Peace. But with truth comes tests. There we go at God happens, and the storm came fast. The media erupted. Headlines spread like wildfire. God does next. Angelina Jolie embraces Islam. Is Hollywood star secretly Muslim? New identity or PR move? The world watched. And see what does next, but she didn't care. The world speculated, but she was grounded. Does next. Friends distanced themselves. Contracts vanished. Invitations stopped arriving. God does next. But in their place came something better. The let-goes when we God does next. The early morning calls of Atan now replaced the chaos of deadlines. See what does next. The verses of core and replaced scripts. Sujud replaced spotlight. And see what go, and what she lost in the world, she gained in the presence of the divine. See what does next. She found sisters who didn't care about her fame, but loved her soul. She see what happens. She found scholars who taught her with gentleness, not judgment. She found Go and children who saw her not as a celebrity. We let go and does next, but as a humble woman bowing to her Lord. And in that new world she bloomed. When God happens, He was next. The same woman who once felt empty in mansions now felt whole in simple prayer rooms. Today what explain the one who once sought freedom in rebellion now found it in submission. She was no longer chasing an image. She was becoming a servant, a Muslim. Her journey, however, wasn't without pain. The God does next. The backlash from Hollywood was brutal. Roles dried up. Directors hesitated. Campaigns dropped her. But she smiled through it all, and see what goes next. Because she now knew her provision came from Allah, not people. Her fame once defined her. Now her faith did. She spoke less but meant more. God does next. Her actions spoke louder than any interview ever could. She began to speak. Gently, respectfully. About her journey. She didn't God debate. She didn't argue. She shared. And what she shared moved hearts. Women across the world felt seen. Next, converts felt hope. Doubters began to question. And slowly, next, the narrative began to shift. Angelina Jolie, once a Hollywood rebel, had become a warrior of truth. Not by force, but by grace. Not by shouting, but by living. She visited the Kaaba in secret, wrapped in an abaya. Tears streaming down her face as she circled the house of Allah. No cameras, no entourage. Just her Lord, and her heart finally at home. She stood in Arafat. She walked through Medina, and in every step, she whispered gratitude. She had found what billions already knew, that Islam was not just a religion, it was life, it was light, it was love. To dare and see, years passed, and the world began to see her differently. Not as a fallen star, God does next, but a rising soul. Her children embraced the change. Some followed her into Islam. Others respected it. When what does next? But all of them saw the peace it brought their mother. God does next. Her eyes now carried a calm the world couldn't deny. Her smile does next. Her smile wasn't for the cameras anymore. It was for her Creator. God done next. She started projects focused on rebuilding Islamic communities. Not for fame, what God does next, but for the sake of Allah. She helped build schools, masjids, orphanages. Quietly, no press releases, no red carpet, just intention, just sincerity. See what God does next. She mentored young Muslim girls who felt unseen. See what does next. She stood with hijabi women who faced discrimination. She explored what happens. She supported reverts who were disowned. She became a beacon, not because of who she was, but because of who she now served. And still, the world whispers, is it real? Is it lasting? Is it her final act? What does next? But those who see beyond the noise know, this is no act. This is no show. This is faith. This is submission. This is truth. Her journey reminds us that guidance is not about our past. See what does next. It's about our heart. That Allah can guide whom He wills, from wherever they are. That no one is too famous, too broken, or too far gone. When we've no spar what does next. That even the most unlikely hearts can be softened. Gone does next. And that when Allah wants good for a person, nothing. No fame, no media. And see what God force, no force, can stop that light from reaching their soul. Today when see what God does next. Angelina Jolie's world did change. It shocked those who thought they knew her. See what God does next. But the real shock isn't in what she became. It's in what she left behind as something eternal. For something eternal. She let go and she left applause for silence. She left scripts for the Quran. God is next. She left man's praise for God's pleasure. And in doing so, see what does next. She became not just a star of cinema, but a light for seekers, a witness of the truth. A living reminder that this world is nothing, and Allah is everything. J's formats, usually articles, essays. Ya God dust. Your blog posts mean use hot hain. YouTube scripts key line natural flow are emotional. Closure zida powerful hoti high. Jab script end hoti ak emotional y ak a impactful sentence par. To woo viewer key dill. Ku jatahai r unhi video key. Bad sochen par majba Carter high.
They called her a star, Hollywood royalty, a woman of unmatched beauty, prestige, and global fame. But even in the spotlight, surrounded by the glitz of red carpets and the applause of millions, Angelina Jolie was quietly drowning, not in wealth or success, but in questions, in pain, in a haunting void that no award could ever fill. And then, something happened. Not on a film set, not at a press conference, but in a dusty refugee camp, under a broken tent. While holding the trembling hand of a forgotten child, she heard something, a verse, a voice, a whisper of truth. That moment would change everything. because what she heard wasn't just a sound. It was the Quran. And it didn't just speak to her. It shook her soul. There are stories the world forgets, and there are stories that refuse to be forgotten. This is one of them. Angelina Jolie wasn't always searching. She had everything the world says you should want: fame, beauty, influence. But behind her commanding presence was a woman wrestling with unseen wars. A woman who had seen the inside of psychiatric hospitals, who had felt the cold steel of a knife against her own skin, trying to make sense of a world that never gave her peace. She played roles on screen, but inside, she didn't know who she was. And in her private moments, she whispered the same question millions do. Why am I here? Then came the war zones. Not the ones in her films, but the ones in the real world. Jolie became a humanitarian, but she didn't do it for cameras or applause. Something in her broke when she saw real pain, not scripted pain. Real mothers crying over lifeless children, real fathers burying pieces of their hearts. And amidst this horror, she began to feel small, not in weakness, but in realization. The realization that she knew nothing about the world, nothing about God, nothing about the purpose of suffering. In 2001, Angelina was appointed a UNHCR Goodwill Ambassador. It was meant to be symbolic, a title. But for her, it became an awakening. While others were posing for photographs, Jolie was sitting cross-legged with refugees in Pakistan, listening. One afternoon, she heard a young woman recite something soft under her breath. The melody was haunting, the words foreign, but they held weight. Jolie asked her what it was. "It's the Quran," the woman said. "It comforts me." Jolie didn't say anything, but something stirred inside her. Later that night, under a starless sky, Angelina asked her translator to read her what the woman was reciting. It was from Surah Al-Baqarah. "And we will surely test you with something of fear and hunger and a loss of wealth and lives and fruits, but give good tidings to the patient." Jolie sat silently. Her eyes welled up, not because she understood everything, but because something finally made sense. Pain was not random. Suffering was not meaningless. It was a test, a journey, a road back to God. That night, Jolie requested a Quran in English. For months, she kept it close. Not for religion, not for conversion, but for understanding. She read it like she'd read no other book. Not as a script, but as a lifeline. Do not despair. And the more she read, the more she began to see a version of herself that Hollywood never gave her space to find. A version of herself that was not defined by roles or directors or awards, but by silence, reflection, surrender. She found herself drawn to verses that spoke of justice, compassion, and humility. She underlined passages about the orphan, the widow, the refuge. These weren't abstract concepts to her. They were the people she'd met, the lives she'd held. The Quran didn't romanticize suffering. It dignified it. It honored it. And more than that, it made her feel seen. One day, while visiting a Syrian refugee family in Jordan, a child asked her why she was always helping Muslims. Jolie knelt down and smiled. "Because you remind me of who I wish I could be." The child's father looked at her, surprised, and asked if she was Muslim. Jolie paused. "Not yet," she said. That "not yet" wasn't a performance. It wasn't a PR stunt. It was a confession. A woman who had walked through the world's darkest corners, now beginning to see light. The media never told this story. They saw the scarf on her head as a gesture of respect, not a sign of spiritual searching. They filmed her visits, but missed her tears. They photographed her holding the Quran, but never asked why. Because the world has a way of silencing truth when it threatens the narrative. But inside her heart, something undeniable was happening. She spoke privately about the discipline of Muslims, how 5 prayers a day kept them grounded, how the fasting in Ramadan reminded them of gratitude, how charity wasn't just a suggestion but a pillar. These weren't just rituals, they were reflections of something bigger, of surrender, of unity, of purpose. Jolie began changing, slowly, quietly. She distanced herself from certain roles, refused scripts that glorified violence or sexual exploitation. She started adopting a modest wardrobe, not for attention, but for intention. She donated millions to Muslim communities without a press release. She sat in masjids during calls to prayer, even if she didn't know all the words. One scholar she met in Turkey told her, "Angelina, the Quran isn't a book you read. It's a book that reads you." She smiled. That's exactly how it feels. She often reflected on Surah Ash-Shah. Indeed, with hardship comes ease. It became her anchor, not because life became easier, but because she became stronger. The woman who once carved pain into her own body was now finding healing in verses that spoke directly to her heart. In an interview that was never aired, Jolie admitted, "When I hear the Quran, I feel like someone is finally telling me the truth. Not sugar-coated, not censored, just the truth. And sometimes it hurts, but it also frees me." She wasn't claiming perfection. She wasn't making a declaration, but she was walking towards something, towards peace, towards truth, towards God. She often sat under the sky at night, Quran in hand, and whispered prayers she didn't know how to say. "God, guide me," she'd say. "Help me be better." And even though she didn't grow up in a mosque, didn't speak Arabic, and didn't memorize chapters, she was heard. Because guidance is not about geography, it's about sincerity. The Quran began shifting how she raised her children. She taught them about empathy, about justice, about standing with the oppressed, not from a script, but from her soul. She read them stories of the prophets, of Moses, of Maryam, of Yusuf. They weren't fairy tales, they were blueprints. She once told a close friend, "People think I'm saving others, but the truth is Islam is saving me." Her life became quieter, but richer. Less Hollywood, more humanity. She still made films, but the films had purpose. She still walked red carpets, but she no longer chased their approval. The applause meant little, because now she knew what mattered. She once said, "I used to think religion was about control, but now I see it's about liberation. The Quran didn't trap me. It set me free. This journey isn't over. It may never be broadcast. It may never trend, but in the quiet corners of her life, a woman the world thinks it knows is slowly transforming, not for headlines, but for her soul. In a world full of noise, she found silence. In a world of fiction, she found truth. In a world that told her she was a goddess, she found peace in surrendering to the one true God. And that is the story that will never win an Oscar, but it will win something far greater. A soul. I storytelling style kisi blog yaya sajs nahi hoti jan. Conclusion. Lik kar end kia jata hai. Is style mean emotional impact natural osiata high. Last sentence be story ka kisa hota high. Alagsi ending line nahi hoti.